Okay, cool. All right, I'm ready for us to restart.
Okay.
Martin, appreciate your time on Africa today. Our focus is on terrorism on the continent, with specific emphasis to the impact that has had on Nigeria. Talk to us about the incidence of terrorism on the continent. There certainly seems to be a surge of terrorism activities.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me on the show once again. And a very good afternoon to you from here in Abuja. Yes, the spate of terrorism seems to be on the rise in Africa, especially in the western part of Africa. You don't tend to see much of that in the southern part of the African distant, and then towards central part of Africa as well. And if you look at the western part of Africa, there seems to be unrest. If you move a little bit into Ethiopia, you find the tension, although there seems to be a kind of a modus vivendi that has been arrived by the Ethiopian government and the rebel group. So you come into Mali, you move down into Senegal is a bit safe, sort of safe, and they know the reason why they want that country to be safe. They look at their neighbors in Africa. If you come into Niger, Chad, and Nigeria, it's a tense environment entirely. And this is largely as a result of the activities of a terrorist group. Boko Haram has gone international from Nigeria into Chad and Niger. And in my opinion, I would think that there is a failure on the part of the government in Africa, and the AU has not responded as it should be. It's still an organization that, for me, indulges more in the kind of diplomacy that does not promote the security that the continent needs. So in a nutshell, I will say the onus lies on the AU, because if Africa is not safe, then we're all in trouble.
But there are a number of factors, Martin, that lead to terrorism activities. Hardship and deprivation are some of them. What are some of the other factors that are influences of terrorism?
Okay, with respect to Nigeria, I will take on hardship. I will take on hardship. There is, Adam Smith talks about people being capable of meeting the necessaries and conveniences of life. And the absence of that capacity to meet the necessaries and conveniences of life largely explains the spate of terrorism in my country, Nigeria, especially in the northern part of the country, where you have backwardness in terms of education, unemployment, and then it becomes a fertile ground for recruiting agents to perpetrate acts of terrorism. My colleague at Birmingham University, Emeka Njoku, and Joshua Kintayo at Kent University in Brussels have engaged this in their scholarly writings. And then again, I am not of the opinion that you need to tackle terrorism using the kinetic approach. In my opinion, kinetic approach will deteriorize the problem and it will rear its ugly head once again. You should pay attention in addressing the economic challenges of the people, because people can be paid as low as 5,000 naira to engage in suicide bombing here. We've seen it here in Nigeria, in the northern part of the country. So if it's that cheap to get people involved in acts of terror for 5,000 naira, then there is a problem. There is a problem. So we have that. Then the kinetic approach in my country, Nigeria, the defense budget has gone up in recent time. And the persons have mentioned their names here. Emeka Njoku has a work titled The Merchants of Terror. And he paid attention largely in looking at defense budget in Nigeria in that article. And there is sufficient reason to believe that so much has been invested in tackling terrorism, what he calls a counter-terrorism economy. It has become an economy that people live on within the military and even those lawmakers as well. So you pump in money into fighting terror, and then you create employment for people, sort of, not a formal employment, because people live on this money. The monies are not channeled into buying arms. You send the soldiers into the battlefield and they confront these terrorists with arms that are far above what they are using. So you will have situations where there are suicide among the military personnel who are in the battlefield. Some have absconded, and then there are some who have, partnered with the terrorist organization in providing sensitive information that will lead to an attack on the military itself again. So poor enumeration of field soldiers in the battlefield too has contributed to, allowing this thing to grow in a way. So you have the economy on the one hand, which has not been addressed by the government. And it's very easy for you to hear when you tune the TV. Even this morning, I was in a vehicle and I could hear monies going that have been voted into addressing sensitive and critical sectors of the economy in Nigeria that ended up in private pockets. So this happens too, not just in the military, in education, in, mention other sectors that are very sensitive to the development of the Nigerian economy that have not gotten the kind of attention that they should get. So there is an economic problem that necessarily incentivize terrorism in Nigeria because most of these people don't have a job and they serve as a fertile ground for recruiters to recruit them into acts of terror.
Well, let's talk about religion, Martin, because one of the things that we are all too familiar with, in certain instances, is the promise of what lies ahead for those that, for instance, will do suicide attacks when they reach heaven. Is a conversation that we are all too familiar with. So, does religion play a significant part in extremist movements?
Yes, I think in the case of Nigeria, it does, especially up north here. In the southern part of the country, especially the Yoruba-speaking side of the country, you have Muslims and Christians. You could have, for instance, the same brothers from the same mother, from the same family, one being a Muslim, one being a Christian. They are liberal. But in the northern part of the country, it's quite difficult to find that. And yes, I agree with you that there are instances where that verse you mentioned in the Quran, people hamper on it, in order to promote acts of radicalism. You die, you go into heaven, you have 7 virgins. But there are some Islamic clerics who have come out to preach against this. It's nowhere stated in the Quran that when you do this, you fight the jihad, you go to heaven. So in the northern part of the country, there are Islamic scholars who have been kicking against this because it's obvious now that these guys are making life unstable for they themselves in the northern part of the country. Activities have been paralyzed. Schools have been shut down. So if you want to promote this, then you're affecting the development of these regions. You understand? So the religion issue has been downplayed, kind of. And leaders in the northern part of the country have realized that this is a war that has to be fought by any means in order to end it, so that there should be some level of peace in the northern part of the country. Like Borno, Yobe, into Zamfara now is the hotbed of kidnapping. And you cannot separate, as it is at the moment, the activities of the kidnappers from the activities of the insurgents. In Kaduna, for instance, it has been explained that they work hand in hand. And that was why recently the United States of America released a travel advisory warning its citizens to avoid, for those who are here on critical missions in Nigeria, to avoid visiting some certain states in the northern part of the country. And there is a geopolitical mapping of crimes in the country. For instance, in the Niger Delta territory is maritime crime and kidnapping, except for Port Harcourt in Rivers State. But if you speak of Akwa Ibom, the oil-bearing communities, there is, so the advisory system warns against traveling in that area. But in the northern part of the country, especially Zamfara, Sokoto, Borno, Yobe, they've warned against acts of terrorism and kidnapping. In Kaduna State, it's kidnapping, So you can't really separate. And the kidnapping has become a very big economy in Nigeria now. You kidnap, you request for as high as 50 million and the kidnapping has assumed another dimension of profiling. The kidnappers now profile who they will kidnap for reasons, knowing that there are some you kidnap.
Who's most susceptible to being kidnapped?
What? I didn't get that.
Sorry. So who is most susceptible to being kidnapped? You talk about the kidnappers now profiling. Who are they profiling? Who are the candidates, the ready candidates for kidnapping, if you will?
Yes, okay. Like in my state, I come from North Central. In my state, in Benue State, a commissioner serving in the present government in the state was kidnapped. And up until now that I'm talking to you, his whereabouts is not known because the PRO, the police public relation officer, issued a statement to state that the police is on top of the situation, but we've not heard. And I don't know if the demand for ransom has been made yet. Definitely it will be, because that's their modus operandi. When they kidnap, they do this. And so government officials seems to be the target at the moment. And recently, one of our senior professor, a deputy vice chancellor from my alma mater, was kidnapped too. So the kidnapping now, they profile the kind of persons they will, in my opinion, what I see in recent time, what has been happening, I think they go for those that they can make money out of it. Because, for instance, you kidnap some people who you demand for 50 million and the family cannot raise that 50 million to pay. And then again, the government made a move. The National Assembly tried to pass a law to criminalize payment of ransom. And I remember there's a Bishop Hassan Kuka, one of an activist, he's a bishop of Sokoto diocese, who said that it's a failure on the part of the government. He has paid repeatedly. Priests have been kidnapped and he has paid money for them to be released. If the government has failed, it cannot provide security for the state. The government should not be saying that it should be payment of ransom should be criminalized. For instance, if I'm kidnapped, or God forbid, if I'm kidnapped and my family has the capacity to pay that to get me free, why wouldn't they pay if the government is not there to provide security? So it's sort of like profiling for kidnapping at the moment, the way it is in the country.
Are any of these kidnappers ever actually caught?
Well, we don't, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think the government has prosecuted any that I know of, except the government has done that I don't know of. And I think there is sort of acting in cahoots. There are people who benefit from this. And like I told you, it's an economy, an illicit economy, given the kind of money it generates for those who live on it. Paying 50 million, that's a lot of money. And if you know that you can kidnap someone and get 50 million with the snap of your finger, you wouldn't want to work. So if the government, and the former military dictator once said that if an act of terrorism lasts for 24 hours unabated, the government has a hand in it. And I believe that some persons in government have a hand in what is happening in the country at the moment. There is a total failure on the part of the government, because initially, when the president assumed office, he assumed with so much support from Nigerians in 2015. And in his inaugural speech, he made it clearly that he's moving the military command to the northeastern part of the country, which was celebrated. And it was believed that once that is done, at least the activities of the terrorists will be nipped in the bud. But we haven't seen that. At a certain point in time, the military issued a statement saying it has technically, used the adjective technically, defeated the Haramists, the terrorists. And I think they were angered by this. And when they started attacking again, it was more brutal and more violent than it used to be before. So it has moved from technical to more attacks. And recently here, somewhere around Lube, where I'm sitting here and having this interview with you, there was a collaboration with the DSS, Department of State Security Service, and the US military, and arms were uncovered somewhere around here. Somewhere around where I'm seated and having this interview with you. We don't know how far the investigation has gone. The report is that arrests have been made, but we don't know how far the prosecution has gone. And given how this operates, I think we won't hear anything about that anymore. So the government has not lived up to its responsibility of providing security for its citizens as expected and as is enshrined in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So I don't know if I've answered the question.
So what do you believe government actually needs to do? Because obviously the one thing that we've talked about is that many people that end up joining these various cells, if you will, or these terrorist groups or bandits as they refer to in some areas, is because of poverty. So what would that overall plan look like by government to quell terrorism in Nigeria specifically?
Yes, in fairness, I think I'll be more critical and objective. I want to analyze the policy of the government in the area of addressing poverty. So for the first time in the history of Nigeria, we have a Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. And essentially the ministry was established to address this kind of issues that you've mentioned, poverty and all of that. But the modus operandi of the ministry, I think, leaves so much to be desired. So the government now does what it calls conditional cash transfer of 5,000 naira to people who are not decent. I wonder, given the economic situation, inflation is at its all-time high, what you can use 5,000 naira to do. Liberalize the economy. You have a lot of graduates who don't have jobs, and some of these kidnappers are educated. The jobs. I was somewhere around in Abuja, and a young man was telling me that he's been looking for a job after he left school. There is no job. He has gone into cobbling, Those kind of people need money to support them. There are those who cannot go into cobbling. And if there is an offer to join a kidnapping kingpin organization, they willingly take it and start doing that. So the Ministry of Humanitarian Intervention has not been able to live to its constitutional mandate that it was established. And I think the high level of unemployment in northern Nigeria, in the northern part of the country, is alarming, really, really alarming, and coupled with backwardness in education. The southern part of the country is a lot more on this, but the jobs are not there. And I'm not an advocate that the government should provide employment opportunity. No, it's not the duty of the government to provide employment opportunity, but it is the duty of the government to provide enabling environment for businesses to thrive. And this government has not been able to do that, because I will not put in my money in an environment that is insecure. Most businesses are complaining today in this country. Inflation is high. Electricity is epileptic. They have to live on diesel. The overhead is too much. They can't employ. In a society where you want to bridge the gap between the haves and have-nots, what you do is you create an enabling environment where small-scale businesses will come up. And those small-scale businesses will take people off the streets. We don't have much of that in Nigeria. That's the problem. It's either you are working for the government or you're working for Aliko Dangote, and there's a limit. Next to the government, the highest employer of labor in this country is Aliko Dangote. He's the highest employer next to the government. There's a limit to which he can do that. But you don't have, in the middle class, which is the engine room of any economy, you don't have small businesses that can employ and create, take off the burden of the government to provide employment opportunity that will make you have people who wake up in the morning, they have where to go and work. You don't have that. But there is so much money in the country that goes into the pockets of the politicians. So the policy that, in my opinion, the government should have put in place to address the problem of poverty in Nigeria is to cover the loopholes and make monies available to beef up critical infrastructures that will aid the growth of businesses in Nigeria. Because no economy that I know of in Nigeria, in Africa, or in the world that grows without the middle class. Even in the US, the engine room of the United States economy is the middle class. Once you take off the middle class, you have a problem. And we don't have a middle class in Nigeria. We don't. Either you have so much you are on top of the 1% or you are below the ladder. And that is why you see crime rates. And another contributing factor in our country is our politics. It is worse than terrorism, because our politics is the gateway to financial security in Nigeria. win election, which is zero sum. Whatever method you can adopt to win election, just adopt it, you win election, you go to the National Assembly or you become a governor. The governors are rich. And the governors are thinking about after 7, 8 years in office, they want to go to the National Assembly and become senators. So you finish serving as your 8 years in your state, just like my governor currently is doing. He wants to go to National Assembly. And he has not impacted in developing the economy of his state. He hasn't. So that's the problem. It's very much in our politics. I don't know if I've been able to answer your question.
Absolutely, Martin. Appreciate your time on Africa Today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. If we don't speak, have a good holiday.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
I'll be busy with the election, so I'll be covering the election. So this election season.
Yeah. Your election started in February, right?
Yeah, elections start in February, but we're campaigning. So I'm doing field works. I'm traveling up and down. I'm collecting data around the country. So I'm monitoring, and then I'll be somewhere in the southern part of the country to vote for the election.
Okay. I'm just going to ask you one question very quickly, since we talked about the elections. If you can just answer it within like a minute or two at the max, because you're almost out of time. Martin, you have the elections upon us happening in February of next year, I believe. What is the likely impact of some of these terrorist activities that we're talking about, or issues around insecurity likely to have on the elections?
Well, the question is a very important question, considering the fact that elections have been postponed in Nigeria as a result of the tense insecurity situation. Even the last election, the one before the last one was postponed. The last one was postponed as a result of logistical nightmare. So there was a time the National Security Advisor canceled against conducting, I think it was the 2015 general election. He canceled against that, indicating that the security agencies are not prepared yet. So the political elite have a way, when it's something that concerns them and they will benefit from, they have a way of providing ad hoc solutions for elections to take place. So I'm of the view that before the election, they will do the same thing as they've been doing. They'll provide the security, and then we'll have the election, and then after the election, they are sworn in, they will return to their base as they've been doing again. But to what end? We'll have the election, because if we don't have the election, the government that will be in place will be an unconstitutional government. We will definitely have the election. But the political atmosphere is terribly charged at the moment. The country is polarized, and in my opinion, I think for the first time in Nigeria's history, we'll be having an election that will have a run-of election, because there are 3 candidates that are contending for the presidency. Peter Obi, who, with all sense of modesty, is my preferred candidate, and then Ashwaju Ahmed Bola Tinubu, who is a candidate of the APC. Peter Obi is a candidate of the Labour Party. And then there is Atiku Abubakar, the former vice president, who is a candidate of the People's Democratic Party. And these guys are in control of the regions they come from. Sort of, Obi is from the southeast, Atiku is from the northeast, and Tinubu is from the southwestern part of the country. And there is this wave around in Nigeria that the country is matured for a southeastern president, because in 1999 we had a southwestern president, and then after that we had a northwestern president who didn't complete his tenure. He died, and his deputy from the southern part of the country took over and completed his tenure, in the person of Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. Jonathan left, and Buhari took over in 2015, who is from western part of the country. He has done 8 years, and his vice president is from the southwestern part of the country. And the southeastern part of the country has not produced the presidency. Why am I saying all of this? I'm saying all of this because there was a political settlement in 1999, which the elites amongst themselves arrived at, that the presidency should go to the southwestern part of the country, because In 1993, someone from the southwestern part of the country won the election, but the military annulled the election. So Obasanjo became the president in 1999 and served up until 2007. Yar'Adua from northwestern part of the country became the president in 2007 till 2010. He died. So Jonathan completed his tenure and won election in 2011. So Jonathan served till 2015, and then Buhari won from the northwestern part of the country, and he has done 8 years. So the belief is that a president from the southeastern part of the country of Igbo extraction should succeed in next year's presidential election. So that's the tense atmosphere we are in Nigeria.
We'll continue to monitor that. Martin, appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.